Welcome to Godless and Grounded. Blind faith is one of the most fascinating and puzzling aspects of human psychology. It is the kind of belief that clings on even when there is no evidence, no reason, and sometimes even when there is clear proof against it. Blind faith asks people to close their eyes to reality and follow what they have been told without question. It is often presented as a virtue, but in reality it reveals a lot about how our minds work, how cultures are shaped, and how authority keeps its power over people. To understand blind faith, we need to look at psychology, history, and everyday examples from life. At its core, blind faith is about certainty in the face of uncertainty. Humans naturally dislike uncertainty. We want to feel safe, secure, and sure about the world we live in. Not knowing what happens after death, not knowing why bad things happen, or not knowing if there is meaning to life can cause a deep discomfort. Instead of facing the unknown, blind faith offers ready-made answers. These answers are often simple, absolute, and comforting. It is easier to believe that a God controls everything, that every suffering has a purpose, or that a holy book contains perfect truth than it is to wrestle with doubt and complexity. Psychologists often point out that human beings are wired to look for patterns and agency. We see faces in clouds, we think events happen for a reason, and we assume someone or something is behind things that happen. This survival instinct helped our ancestors. If they heard a sound in the bushes, it was safer to assume it was caused by an animal rather than by the wind. But this instinct also makes us prone to believing in unseen forces even when there is no evidence. Blind faith builds on this instinct. When people do not understand lightning, they say it is caused by gods. When they do not understand illness, they say it is punishment from heaven. And even today, when science explains these things, many still prefer to hold on to supernatural explanations because they fit their desire for meaning. Another key part of blind faith is authority. Most people are taught their religion or belief system from childhood. They grow up hearing it from parents, teachers, and leaders they trust. When a child is raised to believe that questioning is wrong, their critical thinking gets stunted. They learn to obey rather than to explore. Authority figures also benefit from this system. Religious leaders, for example, often insist that faith without evidence is stronger than faith based on proof. By teaching that doubt is sinful, they discourage questioning and keep control over their followers. History shows countless examples of how blind faith has shaped human societies. Wars have been fought in the name of gods. People have been burned alive because others believed they were witches. Scientists were punished for suggesting the earth revolved around the sun because it went against scripture. None of these actions were based on reason or evidence. They were based on the psychology of blind faith, where people believed what they were told without thinking critically. Even today, blind faith drives people to refuse medical treatment, to reject scientific facts like evolution, or to believe in miracles that have never been proven. Blind faith also creates group identity. Believing in the same ideas as everyone around you makes you feel like you belong. People want to be accepted by their community, and questioning shared beliefs can lead to isolation. This is why many keep silent even when they have doubts. It feels safer to stay in the group than to stand alone. In this way, blind faith becomes less about truth and more about loyalty. It is not about whether the belief is correct, but about whether it keeps you inside the circle of your family, culture, or nation. One of the strongest psychological forces behind blind faith is fear. Many religions tie belief to reward and punishment. Believe and you get paradise. Doubt and you get eternal torment. This fear-based conditioning keeps people from asking questions. Imagine a child told from a young age that if they do not believe, they will burn forever. That child grows up with a deep anxiety that questioning might risk their eternal safety. Even if they later sense that the belief does not make sense, the fear lingers in their subconscious. This fear is powerful enough to silence reason. It is the same way someone with a phobia knows logically that there is no danger, yet their body reacts with terror. Blind faith works on the same emotional level. Blind faith also thrives on confirmation bias. People notice and remember the things that support their beliefs and ignore the things that challenge them. If someone prays and later something good happens, they say it is proof their prayer was answered. If nothing happens, they say it was not part of the plan, or they prayed the wrong way. Either way, the belief stays safe from challenge. This way of thinking is comforting, but it blocks people from learning the truth. Confirmation bias makes blind faith seem unshakable because every outcome can be explained to fit the belief. Real life offers many examples of how blind faith operates. Think about the faith healers who claim to cure illnesses with prayer. Many people spend money on them instead of going to doctors. If someone happens to feel better after, they credit the healer. If they do not, they are told their faith was not strong enough. This way, the system protects itself. The healer never needs to prove anything, and the believer never feels justified in walking away. Or think about those who give their savings to religious leaders who promise them wealth in return. When the wealth does not come, they are told to give even more or to be patient. Instead of asking if the promise was false, they double down. This is the trap of blind faith. Another factor that keeps blind faith alive is tradition. People often defend their beliefs not because they are true, but because they are old. They say things like, "This is what our ancestors believed. This is how it has always been done, therefore it must be right." But tradition alone is not a reason to believe something. At one time, people believed the earth was flat, that disease was caused by demons, and that kings ruled by divine right. These traditions were eventually challenged and proven wrong. Yet many still cling to religious traditions simply because they are inherited, not because they are logical. Blind faith also gives people a sense of control, even when it is an illusion. Life is full of randomness. Accidents happen, natural disasters strike, and people suffer for no reason. Believing that a higher power controls everything makes people feel less helpless. They think there is a plan behind every tragedy. This belief might bring comfort, but it also stops people from taking real action. If a flood is seen as punishment from God instead of a result of poor planning, then leaders feel less pressure to build better dams. Blind faith turns problems into divine mysteries rather than human challenges we can solve. There is also the element of identity protection. Once people tie their identity to their belief, letting go feels like losing themselves. If someone has spent their whole life calling themselves a believer, if their family and friends share the same faith, and if their role in society is built on that belief, then questioning it feels like tearing down their entire life. This makes blind faith more than just an intellectual issue. It becomes emotional and personal. Changing one's belief would mean facing shame, rejection, and sometimes even danger. This is why many people prefer to stay inside the comfort of blind faith rather than face the turmoil of change. When we study blind faith, we also see how it thrives on repetition. Repeated prayers, rituals, and readings reinforce beliefs over time. When something is repeated often enough, it starts to feel true simply because it is familiar. Psychologists call this the illusion of truth effect. The more often you hear a statement, the more likely you are to believe it, even if there is no evidence. Religions use this effect through daily prayers, weekly sermons, and constant reminders. These repeated rituals shape minds in powerful ways, making blind faith feel natural and unquestionable. Blind faith also takes advantage of emotional experiences. People often mistake strong feelings for proof. If someone cries during prayer or feels peace during meditation, they take it as evidence that their belief is true. But emotions do not prove reality. You can feel joy while listening to music, but that does not mean the song is supernatural. You can feel awe at a beautiful sunset, but that does not mean the sun is a god. Yet blind faith convinces people that their feelings are messages from the divine, when in reality they are simply natural responses of the human mind. Think also about the way blind faith spreads through stories. Every religion is full of tales of miracles, answered prayers, and divine interventions. These stories are told again and again until they feel real. But when examined carefully, they often turn out to be myths, exaggerations, or events explained by natural causes. Still, the power of story is strong. People connect emotionally with stories more than with facts, and so blind faith grows not through evidence, but through the repetition of powerful stories that capture the imagination. Blind faith often functions like a shield. It protects people from doubt, but at the same time, it also blocks them from growth. Imagine a person who has never questioned their beliefs since childhood. They accept every teaching, every ritual, every command without a second thought. On the surface, they might look strong, confident, and certain. But this certainty is fragile because it is not built on understanding. It is like building a house on sand. The structure looks firm, but when the ground shifts, it collapses. One interesting thing about blind faith is how it handles contradictions. People with blind faith can hold beliefs that clearly clash with one another, and yet they manage to live with both without noticing the tension. For example, some believe their God is merciful and forgiving, while also believing the same God will torture people forever for not believing. Both ideas cannot logically exist together, but blind faith allows people to accept them side by side without asking how they fit. This mental trick is called cognitive dissonance. Instead of resolving the conflict by questioning, people with blind faith find ways to rationalize it. They may say, "We cannot understand God's ways," or "Human logic is limited." In this way, blind faith turns contradictions into mysteries rather than problems, keeping the belief safe from scrutiny. Another psychological tool of blind faith is authority bias. When a religious leader, parent, or sacred book says something, many people assume it must be true simply because of the source. This is not unique to religion. People often trust doctors, teachers, or experts without checking for themselves. But in the case of blind faith, the authority is presented as unquestionable. A holy book is said to be perfect. A prophet is said to be sinless. A leader is said to be chosen by God. Once someone accepts this unquestionable authority, they no longer feel the need to think critically. Whatever the authority says becomes truth by default. This is why blind faith is so powerful, because it locks people into a system where questioning feels like betrayal. There is also the strong influence of community pressure. Humans are social creatures. We want to fit in, to be accepted, to be loved by those around us. In communities where belief is tied to social identity, rejecting or even questioning the faith can lead to shame, rejection, or even violence. Many people stay in their religion not because they are convinced by its teachings, but because they fear losing their family, friends, or social status. Blind faith thrives in these environments because people learn to silence their doubts to protect their relationships. This is why even highly educated people can remain stuck in blind faith. It is not always about intelligence. It is often about the social and emotional cost of leaving. Blind faith can also be addictive in a way. It gives people a constant sense of purpose, structure, and emotional reward. Rituals, prayers, and gatherings release chemicals in the brain that create feelings of peace, belonging, or joy. These feelings can become tied to the faith itself. People mistake the chemical reactions in their brain for spiritual experiences. Just like someone can become addicted to substances or habits that provide comfort, people can become addicted to the comfort of blind faith. They keep going back to the rituals not because they are true, but because they provide emotional satisfaction. Blind faith is also resistant to evidence because of the way it frames doubt. In many religions, doubt is seen as weakness or even sin. This creates a psychological trap. If someone begins to question, they immediately feel guilty or ashamed. They fear punishment or they fear being seen as weak in their community. Instead of encouraging people to examine their beliefs, blind faith discourages them from even taking the first step. This is a clever psychological mechanism because it prevents people from breaking free by making them fear their own thoughts. Let us consider how blind faith interacts with suffering. When tragedies strike, people with blind faith often explain it away as part of a divine plan. If someone dies in an accident, it is said to be God's will. If someone suffers from illness, it is said to be a test. These explanations might bring comfort, but they also stop people from facing reality. Instead of acknowledging randomness, poor human decisions, or natural causes, blind faith pushes people to see suffering as intentional. This can lead to harmful thinking. Instead of working to prevent tragedies, people may accept them as unavoidable. Instead of addressing injustice, they may say justice will be served in the afterlife. In this way, blind faith can make people passive in the face of real problems. There is also the link between blind faith and indoctrination. Indoctrination is not just about teaching beliefs. It is about teaching people not to question. In many cultures, children are introduced to religion at an age when they are too young to think critically. They are told stories of heaven and hell, of miracles and punishments, and they accept them as literal truth. By the time they are old enough to question, the beliefs are already deeply rooted in their identity. Their brain has been shaped to see those beliefs as natural. This is why blind faith is so strong. It does not start with adults making a free choice. It starts with children being trained to accept without doubt. Blind faith also plays on the desire for justice. The world is not fair. Good people suffer, bad people prosper, and many injustices go unanswered. Blind faith offers the promise of ultimate justice. It says there will be reward and punishment after death. It says that no wrong will go unanswered. This promise can be emotionally satisfying, but it is built on belief without evidence. People want so badly for there to be justice that they are willing to believe in invisible systems of reward and punishment. This is another way blind faith uses human psychology. Instead of facing the uncomfortable truth that the universe is indifferent, it offers a comforting story that everything will be set right in the end. Blind faith also thrives in environments of ignorance. When people lack access to education, critical thinking, or alternative perspectives, blind faith fills the gap. Without knowledge of science, people accept supernatural explanations. Without exposure to other worldviews, people assume their own belief must be true. This is why authoritarian regimes often encourage blind faith. It keeps the population obedient and unquestioning. When people believe their suffering is divinely ordained, they are less likely to challenge the system. Real life shows us how blind faith can override even basic survival instincts. There are cases where parents refused medical treatment for their children, choosing prayer instead. Some children died as a result. There are cases where people joined cults that demanded extreme sacrifices, from giving away all their money to committing mass suicide. These are extreme examples, but they reveal the core danger of blind faith. When belief is valued above evidence, people can be led to harm themselves and others in devastating ways. Yet blind faith does not always show itself in dramatic forms. It also appears in small, everyday ways. When someone attributes a lucky coincidence to divine intervention, when they refuse to consider scientific explanations because it feels threatening, when they choose tradition over reason simply because it is easier, that is blind faith at work. It might not be as destructive as in the extreme cases, but it still shapes decisions, attitudes, and behavior in powerful ways. When we look closely, blind faith is not mysterious. It is built on well-known psychological patterns. It appeals to fear of the unknown, desire for comfort, need for belonging, respect for authority, and hope for justice. It repeats stories until they feel true. It uses rituals to shape emotions. It rewards loyalty and punishes doubt. All of these mechanisms are understandable once we step back and examine them. Blind faith might feel supernatural to those inside it, but from the outside, it is simply human psychology at work. The challenge with blind faith is that it is self-protecting. Any argument against it can be dismissed as a test, as deception, or as limited human reasoning. This is why it is so difficult to break free from it. Logic alone is often not enough. People must be willing to face discomfort, uncertainty, and even social rejection. They must value truth over comfort. This is not easy, and it is why blind faith has lasted for so many centuries. But once we understand the psychology of blind faith, we begin to see why it has such a grip on human societies. It is not because the beliefs are true, it is because they satisfy deep psychological needs. They offer certainty where there is none, purpose where there is confusion, and belonging where there is isolation. Understanding this helps us see why blind faith is so powerful, and also why it is so limiting. It keeps people from asking the very questions that lead to real understanding of the world. In the end, blind faith is a mirror. It shows us our fears, our desires, and our weaknesses as human beings. It thrives because it speaks to the parts of us that crave easy answers. But those who learn to question, to embrace uncertainty, and to seek evidence find a different kind of strength. Not the fragile certainty of blind faith, but the resilient confidence of knowing that even without all the answers, we can still keep searching, learning, and growing.